welcome to Buddha Bedtime Stories. Imagine a forest, quiet, untouched, breathing in rhythm with the wind. That forest lives within you. And tonight, we walk slowly beneath its branches. The stories you'll hear have been carried like seeds through centuries of practice, silence, and surrender. Now they take root in your stillness. But first, take a moment with me. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it for you? It's beautiful to know that this circle of stillness includes hearts from all over the world, listening together under one vast sky. There's no need to sit perfectly, no need to focus, just soften. Let your breath move like wind through tall grass. These teachings are not puzzles to solve. They are reflections, gentle, clear, and unforced. Let them touch the part of you that remembers how to be free. And now, with reverence and calm, I'll begin the first story. It started like any other Monday. The inbox blinked with urgency. 142 unread. A blinking red light on the office phone. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. Slack notifications multiplying like rabbits in spring. Julian sipped lukewarm coffee and took a deep breath. Then he dove in. He was efficient, smart, reliable, they called him. Always responsive. Always ready. Always tired. Somewhere between the 7th reply and the 4th Zoom call, he noticed his chest tightening. Nothing sharp, just a quiet constriction, a warning like a traffic light blinking yellow. But he kept going, because the world rewarded output. And silence. Silence didn't show up on KP is. By 4 p.m, his eyes burned. By 6 p.m, he was still typing. He didn't hear the rain start, didn't notice the tea growing cold beside his keyboard, until a calendar reminder popped up. Meditation class, 6:30 p.m, room 4B. He had signed up weeks ago, half joking, a resolution maybe. He almost closed the tab, but something, maybe the silence behind the noise, nudged him. Room 4B was warm, soft lighting, folded cushions, a bell. Only 6 people sat in the circle. A woman at the front, maybe late 40s, calm-eyed, greeted him with a nod, not words. "Sit however you like," she said. Julian sat stiffly, still in his button-up, still full of digital momentum. The teacher closed her eyes, spoke gently. "Let the inbox go. Let the to-do list drop its grip. Notice the breath, that's all." Julian's mind raced. The Henderson file, the Q4 budget, the message he forgot to reply to. But the bell rang again, soft and clear, like a sound not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, his thoughts became less sticky. After 20 minutes, she said, "Busy is not always bad, but sometimes it's a way of avoiding stillness. Ask yourself, what would I hear if I stopped pretending I didn't have time to listen?" Julian felt something twist. Not painfully, just honestly. Because beneath the notifications and meetings and perfectly managed chaos was a quiet voice he hadn't heard in years. It didn't ask for much, just a pause, a breath, a life lived on purpose, not just performed. That night, he walked home in the rain. No umbrella, no rush. Each raindrop felt like punctuation in a sentence he had forgotten how to read. The next morning, his inbox was just as full, but he didn't open it right away. He brewed tea, sat for 5 minutes, watched the steam rise and disappear. And in those 5 minutes, he remembered he was alive, not just employed. Julian didn't quit his job, didn't move to the mountains. He still answered emails, still ran meetings. But once a day, he closed the laptop, turned off the noise, and let the silence speak. The Buddha never warned about email, but he did say, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes peace is not found in responding faster. It's found in not responding at all, at least for a moment. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly, "let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujato, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. Perhaps some of you think the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now, but that is not so. His voice was calm, though each word required effort. You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter. A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence. He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the four jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. He is gone, he said softly, voice breaking. No, whispered another monk, a younger one. He is everywhere now. The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence. Others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it. Strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace, And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. The baby arrived in the middle of the night. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, cheeks flushed with cold, it was placed on the doorstep of the small mountain temple. When the monk opened the door, he found only the child and a young couple trembling in the shadows. The girl clutched her shawl. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "This child is yours," she said. "You are the father." The monk, Hakuin, did not argue. He did not protest. He did not explain. He only looked at the baby, then at the girl, and said softly, "Is that so?" In town, the scandal bloomed like wildfire. Hakuin, the respected monk, the teacher, the silent one, had seduced a local girl. People spat at the ground when they passed him. Merchants whispered behind their hands. Disciples left the temple in shame. Still, Hakuin said nothing. He carried water. He chopped wood. He fed the child with one hand and stirred rice with the other. Winter passed, then spring. The baby grew, laughed, cried, teethed on the corner of Hakuin's robe. And still, the townspeople looked on with judgment. And still Hakuin said nothing. Only that same phrase when asked, "Is that so?" A year passed. The girl returned, eyes lowered, voice trembling. She fell to her knees before Hakuin. "I lied," she said. "It was not you. I was afraid. I blamed you." The crowd had gathered now. Some gasped, some hung their heads. She wept and reached for the child. "I'm sorry. I came to take him home." And Hakuin? He held out the child gently and said, "Is that so?" This is one of the most beloved stories in Zen, not for its drama, but for its stillness, for the way Hakuin held the center, unmoved by praise or blame. He did not fight the accusation. He did not defend his name. He did not collapse under judgment. He simply met life as it came. In the West, we are taught to guard our reputations, to clarify, to prove, to explain. But Zen sees the self as a construct, a house of cards built from opinions, images, and roles. And so, Hakuin let his fall, willingly, without resistance. To many, this seems weak, unwise. But in truth, it takes immense strength to say, "Let them think what they will, I remain." Not in apathy, but in presence. Because the ego is loud, but truth is quiet. Hakuin's phrase, "Is that so?" is not sarcasm. It is not indifference. It is a bow to the unpredictability of life, to its mess, its reversals, its harshness and grace. It is the refusal to cling to any label, hero or villain, saint or sinner, right or wrong. There's a famous Zen saying, "Praise and blame are like the wind. To follow them is to be tossed about like a leaf. To stand firm is to become a tree." Hakuin was a tree, rooted, silent, alive. In private moments he may have wept. He may have watched the baby sleep and wondered why the world twists so easily. But his practice was clear. Do not grasp. Do not reject. Receive each moment and respond not with reactivity, but with integrity. What would you do if someone lied about you? If the world turned against you? If your name became a weapon? Could you breathe? Could you hold the pain without making it your identity? Could you say, "Is that so?" and keep walking? There's another layer to this story. By taking the child in, Hakuin protected the girl. He absorbed her shame, held her fear, became her shield. Not out of guilt, but out of compassion. And when the truth came, he did not demand apology. He did not say, "I told you so." He returned the child like a leaf to the wind. Because Zen asks nothing of others, only this: be fully present and let go. Commentary. In the modern world, everyone is watching, commenting, interpreting, and we're trained to manage perception, to curate our story. But Hakuin reminds us, your life is not what others say. It is what you do when no one understands you, when you're misread, blamed, dismissed. That is where your practice begins. Hakuin did not defend his innocence, because truth does not need defense. It needs stillness. It needs the refusal to flinch. When asked later why he took the child in, Hakuin said, "Because the child needed care, and the girl needed mercy, and the temple needed the Dharma to be lived." No scripture, no debate, just rice, sleep, warmth, and the ability to say yes to life, even when it doesn't make sense. Is that so? Is not an answer. It's an opening, a breath before reacting. A choice to not fight the river, but to float, eyes open, and maybe even smile. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. Every morning, just before dawn, he sat at the corner of Main and River, cross-legged, still, wrapped in an old grey coat with no buttons. People called him the homeless monk. No one knew his real name. No one remembered when he'd first appeared. But he was always there. Rain or shine, winter or summer. Sitting silently beneath the faded mural of a rising sun. He never asked for money, never held a sign, just a small tin bowl at his side. Sometimes people dropped coins into it, sometimes fruit, sometimes nothing at all. He never seemed to mind. Children were the first to notice him. "Is he sleeping?" one asked. "No," said her mother. "He's meditating, I think." And the child, with all the clarity of someone who hasn't yet forgotten how to see, replied, "He looks like he's listening to the whole city breathe." One barista left him a scone each Wednesday. A florist once placed a single lily in his bowl. An accountant gave him a scarf one January dash, which he later passed on to someone colder than he was. Some scoffed. "He's just lazy," said a man in a BMW. "He's just weird," muttered a teen with earbuds in. But others stopped, only for a second. But they did, because something in his stillness felt like a mirror. One afternoon, a reporter tried to interview him, held out a microphone, asked for his name, his background, his reason. The man opened one eye, smiled gently, and said, "I own nothing, but I belong to everything." Then closed his eye again. The story never aired. too quiet, too strange, no hook. But those who paid attention began to notice something. Around him, time slowed. Not literally, but in his presence, people put away their phones, looked up, paused. The world, so hungry for more, seemed to forget itself. For just a moment, there's a teaching in Buddhism. To renounce is not to lose, but to see clearly what you never needed. Some thought he had lost everything, a job, a home, maybe his mind. But maybe he had simply let go of identity, of striving, of the illusion that fulfillment lies in accumulation. One day, a man in a suit stopped and asked, "Don't you want something more?" The monk opened both eyes this time. "I already have it," he said. "What's that?" "A clear sky, a passing breeze, and no hunger in my mind." He didn't preach, didn't convert, but every day his presence was a sermon without words, a reminder that peace isn't a destination. It's a decision. Then one morning he was gone. No note, no trail. Just the faint indentation where he used to sit. The mural behind him had faded a bit more, but someone had drawn a small lotus in chalk right where his bowl used to be. The barista still leaves a scone each Wednesday. The florist still visits, and the accountant, now retired, says he meditates by that wall, not to become something new, but to remember who he was before the noise. And in that city, on that street, somewhere between the rush and the silence, a memory breathes, a man who owned nothing, but gave everything by simply being still. The lake shimmered like a mirror at dawn. Mist hovered just above the water, rising in soft spirals. On its banks, reeds bowed gently in the morning breeze, and lotus blossoms opened their pink faces to the sun. In the middle of the lake stood a small island, quiet, green and hidden from the world. And on this island, in a nest woven from reeds and grace, lived a bird unlike any other. He was a mallard, but not an ordinary one. His feathers were not grey or brown, but a deep, radiant gold. He glowed like a flame in flight, and his heart was as generous as his form was rare. He was the Buddha in one of his many past lives. Once, long ago, he had been a man, a kind and devoted father to 3 daughters. After his death, reborn as a golden bird, he remembered the love he had once held for his family. "I cannot be their father again," he thought, "but I can still care for them." So he flew across hills and rivers, forests and fields, until he reached the cottage where his daughters now lived, alone, in quiet poverty. He landed gently on the windowsill. When the eldest daughter saw the glowing bird, her eyes widened. The bird spoke, softly, from a heart still bound by love. "I have come to help. Pluck one of my feathers and sell it. It will feed you for many days." The girl hesitated, but the bird bowed his head. "It is freely given." She plucked a single feather, golden, smooth, and warm to the touch, and as the mallard took flight again, the room seemed to glow with a little more hope. Days passed, then weeks, and each time the daughters began to hunger, the bird returned, offering a single feather, no more. Their home grew brighter, their faces fuller. But the bird too remained bright, his feathers returning, his heart untroubled. Until one day, greed crept into the house like a shadow at dusk. The youngest daughter asked, "Why does he give only one at a time?" The middle daughter frowned. "He has many. If we plucked them all at once, we would be rich forever." The eldest hesitated. "But he gives them freely from kindness." "Kindness is slow," said the middle one. "We need certainty." And so, one morning, when the golden mallard returned, the daughters did not greet him with bows or thanks. They seized him and plucked, not one, but all. The bird cried out, not in pain, but in sorrow. His wings weakened. His glow faded. The warmth in his eyes dulled like a dying flame. And when the daughters looked down, the feathers they held were no longer gold. Just grey, dull, ordinary, lifeless. As was the bird now lying still in their hands. They gasped. "What happened? Where is the gold?" But no answer came. The mallard lay motionless, too hurt to fly, too kind to curse, and the daughters, stunned and panicked, placed him back in the nest of reeds on the island, hoping he would heal. Weeks passed. The bird recovered. His feathers grew back, slowly, one by one. And though they shone again, he never returned to the cottage. He had given without condition, but greed had mistaken gift for possession, and in doing so, had severed the bond of love. In the forest beyond the lake, an old monk would later say, "A gift freely given must be received with humility. To snatch what is not offered is to lose more than gold. It is to wound the very heart that loves you." In time, the daughters came to understand their mistake, not because they lost their wealth, but because they lost his trust, and no coin can buy that back. The tale of the golden mallard spread from one village to another, told by firelight, whispered by parents to children, painted on temple walls in hues of radiant yellow, not as a warning against birds, but as a lesson about giving and taking. Because true generosity is not a stream to be dammed. It flows, it offers, but it must never be forced. And the purest gifts come not with conditions, but with open wings. In the quiet of a forest monastery, the Buddha once said to his disciples, "There is giving that seeks applause, and there is giving that seeks nothing. The first shines for a moment, the second for lifetimes." The sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him. Because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken. Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. Should we stop flying? Asked one. No, said the wise quail, but we must act together. He showed them a plan. If one is caught in the net, he said, do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly. To freedom? A small chick asked. He nodded. Yes, together. The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out. But the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong. And together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. Strange, he muttered. I've never seen birds do that. He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. Clever little things, he muttered. But they won't always be united. And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, 2 young quail quarreled. You always land too close, snapped one. You always peck too fast, the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. Remember, he said, the net does not care who is right, only who is divided. But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The 2 angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. Lift with us, they called. But the 2 snapped at each other. You grab that side! No, you're too slow. Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down. The fowler emerged from the trees, and that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke, not in anger, but with sorrow. Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy. In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall. But if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart, even the strongest snare cannot hold us. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly. "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. "I died to what I was," he said, "so that I could be born to what is." "And us?" she asked. "What are we now?" He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. "I carry you with me," he said, "not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full." Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. "Mother, who is it?" Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. "Is this?" Yasodhara nodded slowly. "This is your father," The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. "You are a king," the boy said. "I was," the Buddha replied, "but everyone says you will always be a king. I have chosen another path." "Why?" The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. "To be a king is to protect borders," he said. "But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same." Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. "Are you hungry?" "I eat only what is given freely." The boy blinked. "I'll give." The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame, just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. "Who is that?" people whispered. "That is his son," someone said. "That is Rahula." When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. "I want to go with him," he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. "You are still young," she whispered. "You have not seen the world." "But I have seen him," Rahula said, "and he is the world." She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. "Teach me." That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, a half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first, it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain, they take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame. Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple. Not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed. And whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. There was once a tree that stood just beyond the monastery walls. A tall maple. Its leaves flamed gold each autumn, spilling light into the courtyard like scattered coins. Monks often paused beneath it, bowing to its stillness, especially when the season turned. One afternoon in early autumn, a young novice sat beneath the tree, troubled. His master had given him a koan to meditate on. What do you cling to that no longer lives? He had meditated, chanted, even fasted, but the answer would not come. That day, the wind had begun its long conversation with the branches. A single leaf, amber at the edges, twirled down, landed softly in the novice's lap. He stared at it. Fragile, veined, no longer green, still beautiful, but no longer living. The tree gave no sign of loss. No grief, no clinging, only release. Another leaf drifted down, then another. The novice looked up. The tree was letting go of what had once been its crowning glory. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, he spoke with his master. Why does the tree drop what once gave it life? The master replied, because it trusts the cycle. It knows spring will come again. It makes room by releasing. The novice thought of the things he had held too tightly, a grudge from a harsh word, a dream that had withered, an idea of who he should become. He returned to the tree the next day, sat beneath it again. This time, when a leaf fell into his hand, he whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not loss, it is returning." As the days grew colder, the tree became bare. Some monks said it looked lonely, exposed, but the novice saw strength in that nakedness, a kind of quiet surrender. It was not clinging to what had passed. It was preparing for what would come. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the monastery roofs. The tree stood still, unmoving, uncovered, unconcerned. Months passed, and then, one morning in spring, the novice awoke to find tiny buds on the tree's limbs, software green, new. He smiled and understood at last. What we release returns, but only when we've stopped grasping. There is a phrase in Buddhist teaching, you can't receive with a closed hand. The tree had shown this truth. Letting go is not the end. It is the opening. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago, the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at 2 saplings growing side by side. These trees, he said, were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives. The students blinked. They look the same, said one. The sage only smiled. Wait. And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them, sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it, but its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped. Its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between two worlds. It was spring. The trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real, petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air, and the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing, streams paused their song, and even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the 7th step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth travelled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came a Sita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness." And he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, "The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear. I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented. It is remembered. Like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. "You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers. But your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you?" The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: "The miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth." The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper, "This moment matters too." As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. It moved like time ... patient, steady, clear. She had come to the water for answers, not about rituals, not about chanting, but about something deeper. Who am I? She had read sutras, memorized verses, and bowed each morning, but still, a knot remained in her chest. The old teacher, sensing her restlessness, came to sit beside her. They watched the water in silence for a while. Then he pointed to a single droplet clinging to a leaf above the current. It trembled. Round, whole, complete. "Is that a drop of water?" the master asked. She nodded. "Yes," he smiled. Then a breeze blew. The droplet fell and joined the river below. The master turned again. "Now tell me, where is the drop?" This is the story of non-self, of how the self we cling to is like a drop, never separate, never alone. Commentary. We walk through life asking, who am I? What is me? Where do I go when I die? But these questions are like trying to bottle the river. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is not fixed. No eternal soul, no unchanging core, only process, only flow, body, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These 5 aggregates arise and pass like waves. There is no boat, only current. The novice sat with this for many days. She stared at her reflection in the water, noticing how it changed when the wind blew, how it vanished when a stone was thrown, how it returned when the ripples faded. Was the reflection real? Yes. Was it solid? So too with the self. We exist, but not as a thing, as a movement, a flame, not a statue, a song, not a stone. One night, the novice had a dream. She stood before a vast river. She cupped water in her hands, holding it close, but it began to spill, to slip between her fingers, to return to the source. In the dream, she let it go and wept, not from sadness, but relief, because in letting go of the drop, she felt the whole river. When she woke, she wrote a single line in her journal. I am not a drop in the river, I am the river in a drop. This is the heart of rebirth too, not the soul traveling from body to body, but conditions unfolding, like water taking many forms, cloud, rain, stream, mist, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are this moment, arising from countless causes and dissolving into new ones. When the master was old and dying, the novice, now a teacher, sat by his side. She asked him if he was afraid. He smiled faintly and said, "A drop returns to the river. How can it fear?" Then he closed his eyes and was gone. But the river kept flowing. So the next time you feel small or lost or alone, remember the drop and the river it was never truly apart from. The full moon rose slowly over the temple pond. Its pale light spilled across the stone paths, kissed the tips of bamboo leaves, and finally rested on the water surface. Perfect, round, and still. A quiet hush fell over the garden. Even the crickets seemed to pause. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, just long enough to notice the moon. But what the monks gathered around the pond saw was not the real moon. It was only a reflection. A novice named Kaoru sat cross-legged near the water's edge. She had come to meditate, but found herself staring at the luminous circle. It shimmered with every ripple. It danced when the breeze blew. It fractured into 1,000 pieces when a frog leapt across. And yet, when the pond stilled again, there it was, whole, unmoved, unaffected. The head monk, Master Renji, approached quietly. He sat beside her without a word. For a while they both watched. Finally, Kaoru whispered, "It looks so real." Renji nodded. "It does." She tilted her head. "But it's not. It's just light." Renji smiled. "Is your reflection in the mirror not you?" Kaoru hesitated. "I don't know. It looks like me, but it's not me." Then what is it? He asked. A copy, she guessed. Renji turned to her. And what is your idea of yourself? She blinked. A reflection. Renji picked up a small stone. He held it above the pond, then let it fall. Plop. The moon shattered again. 1,000 tiny moons danced outward on the ripples. Does the moon mind? He asked. Kaoru laughed softly. No. Does the moon change? No, she said again. Renji looked at her gently. Then let your mind be the sky, not the water. The moon is always whole, whether you see it clearly or not. That night, Kaoru wrote in her journal, I chase shadows. I polish reflections. I mistake the moon in the water for the truth. The next morning, during temple chores, Kaoru knocked over a bowl. It shattered. Clay and rice spilled across the floor. She gasped. But instead of panic, she remembered the moon. A fellow novice scolded her. She bowed, cleaned the mess. Inside, she felt no shame. Only the quiet smile of someone who had seen a truth. Weeks later, a guest philosopher visited the temple. He asked the monks, what is real? Some spoke of emptiness, others of causes and conditions. One offered the Heart Sutra. But when the question came to Kaoru, she said, the moon and the water. She explained, the moon is reality. The water is our mind. When our mind is still, reality reflects clearly. When disturbed, the image breaks, but not the truth. The philosopher nodded slowly. That is poetic, but how do you know it's true? Kaoru looked up. Because when I stop chasing the reflection, I feel the light on my face. That night, Master Renji shared a final koan with the gathered monks. A monk asked, Master, what is enlightenment? The master pointed to the moon in the sky. Then he pointed to the moon in the water. Then he smiled. No answer, no explanation, just two moons. And the silence between them. There is a saying in Zen, do not mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon itself. And so the teachings end where they began, with a reflection, a still pond, a moon that never moved, and a student who finally stopped looking for herself in the ripples. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him, like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds, slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled. Animals stirred. The air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear. unforced. As if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper, each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still, he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked, and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches, it happened, not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness, because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. Now that you are free, he said, leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget. And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then he saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient, and he knew they were not lost, just tired, just waiting, just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, "They will understand. Some will. Even one is enough." And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering, and how to end it, of breath, and how to follow it, of kindness, and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born for all the world to walk. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. He was the oldest monk in the monastery. No one quite remembered when he had arrived. He had been there before the abbot, before the bell tower was built, before the bamboo grove behind the kitchen had taken root. They called him Elder Wen. His robe was patched at the sleeves, his back curved like a bowed reed, and his eyes were always smiling, like he had seen something long ago and never forgotten it. He didn't teach, not formally, but every morning he lit the incense before dawn. Every afternoon he watered the moss around the garden stones, and in the evening he swept the meditation hall in silence, the broom moving in time with his breath. You could walk past him and miss him entirely, unless you were paying attention. Then you would feel it, that quiet radiance, like sitting near a warm lamp on a winter night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped coming to morning service. He didn't light the incense, didn't sweep, didn't bow. He stayed in his small corner room beside the main hall, lying on his straw mat with hands folded gently over his chest. He was dying. The news spread quickly. Monks whispered in the corridors. Some feared, some mourned. Some tried to distract themselves with chores. But one by one, they made their way to his room. To say goodbye, to ask for wisdom, to seek some final teaching. But Elder Wen said almost nothing. He just smiled. That same soft smile, unmoved by sorrow, unafraid of what came next. One young monk sat at his side and finally asked, "Master, are you not afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes. "Afraid of what?" he whispered. "Of leaving." The old monk chuckled softly, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Leave where?" He looked around his humble room. "There is nowhere to go." Another monk asked, "What is your final instruction?" Elder Wen blinked slowly, then raised one trembling hand and pointed to the teacup beside his bed. It was half full. The tea had long gone cold. But the sunlight touched it just so, glinting off the rim. He smiled again, then closed his eyes, and that evening, he passed. As gently as a flame curling into smoke. No struggle, no fanfare, just a long exhale. And stillness. The monks held a memorial. They chanted sutras. They carried his body wrapped in white cloth to the forest. But what they remembered most was not the ceremony. It was the smile. This is the story of death without fear. The final bow of a life lived in awareness. Commentary. In the West, we prepare for death with wills, hospitals, and quiet dread. We pretend it is far away, or we avoid it entirely. But in Zen, death is not the enemy. It is the mirror that shows you whether you were truly alive. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had already practiced dying. Every time he let go of a grudge, every time he stepped aside for someone younger, every time he bowed in silence, releasing his self-importance. The teacup was his final teaching, so ordinary, so overlooked. But it held the whole Dharma. A cup is useful because it is empty. It can hold, receive, release. But if you cling to the cup itself, you miss the tea. If you fear the cup breaking, you never enjoy what it holds. Elder Wen was ready to leave because he had drunk deeply of life. He had tasted the tea, and he didn't cling to the cup. There's a Zen saying, "Let death come like a welcome guest." That doesn't mean we rush toward it. It means we don't turn our back on it. We live with it, like a quiet friend who reminds us not to waste time. Elder Wen's room is empty now, but the moss he watered still thrives. The broom still leans against the wall. The teacup still rests on the low table, cleaned and dry. And his smile lives in the memory of every monk who sat beside him and realized, stillness is not defeat. Stillness is trust. You do not need to fear the end. You only need to live in such a way that when it comes, you can greet it with a breath and a smile. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so—" "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All 3 of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. "But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances." The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. "If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, 'I failed.'" There was a pause. One novice finally asked, "Then what is the lesson, Master?" Shiro replied softly, "There are times to steer and times to yield." He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. "You cannot hold the wind in your hands," he said, "but you can feel its path against your face." He paused. "And when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm." The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, "Carried, yet free." There's a saying in Chan Buddhism: "The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass." The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. In a small temple nestled between pine trees and fog, there burned a single candle. It was placed each morning in the center of the meditation hall. No glass shield, no tall holder, just a quiet flame in a shallow dish. It flickered gently as monks came and went. It was not large, not dazzling, but it was always there. Software steady, alive. One morning, a gust of wind swept through the open window. The flame bent low, danced wildly, then steadied, then bent again. A novice sitting nearby grew anxious. He reached to close the window, but the old teacher touched his arm and whispered, "Wait, let it breathe." The flame, though small, did not go out. It fluttered, dimmed, but held on. The room stayed still, and after a few moments the wind passed. The candle straightened. its glow calm once more. The teacher turned to the novice and said, "This is your mind. This is your breath. This is your life. A candle by nature is vulnerable. One sharp breath, and it's gone. One careless movement, and it's lost. But that fragility is also its power, because the candle doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't fight to stay lit. It simply responds, bows, sways, returns. In Buddhism, the flame is often used as a metaphor for consciousness, flickering, ever-changing, not a solid thing, but a process, a dance between wick, wax, and air. Your thoughts are like the flame, your body, the wick, your breath, the air that sustains it, and the wind. That's life. The candle cannot control the wind, but it learns to dance with it. And that is the teaching. The novice asked, "But what if the flame goes out?" The teacher smiled. "Then we light it again, and again, and again. This is the practice. You will lose your calm. You will be shaken. Your light will dim, but the wick is still there. The wax remains. You are never without the capacity to be rekindled. There is a Tibetan saying, 'Better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness.' But even deeper is this. Learn to trust the candle even when the wind rises." In the days that followed, the novice watched the flame more closely. He began to notice how it moved, how it bent without fear, how it never clung to its shape from a moment before. And one morning, during Zazen, as a storm passed outside, he did not flinch. He simply watched the flame bend and return. And in that moment, something in him softened too. This is what meditation teaches, not how to still the wind, but how to let the flame bend without going out, how to meet life's changes with grace, how to stop fearing your own flicker. Grief is a wind, so is joy, so is anger, so is love. You cannot block the breeze without also losing the air you need to burn. You must stay open, even when it stings. Especially then, commentary. The Candle and the Wind is not a story about fragility alone. It's about resilience without resistance. It's about remaining warm, soft, and lit, even when the conditions shift. Even when nothing stays steady but your own willingness to begin again. We often think strength looks like staying the same. But sometimes strength is in swaying, in letting go, in trusting that the flame inside you is not so easily put out. You do not need to burn like a bonfire. You only need to glow enough to see your next step, to offer light to the person beside you, to remind the darkness, "I am still here." The teacher once said, "A candle gives all it has, and still the world is warmed by its passing. So be the candle. Even if your light flickers, even if no one sees, even if the wind blows harder tomorrow, burn anyway, not for show, but because this is who you are." As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins in the town of Rajagaha, nestled among ridges of stone and mist. The streets curled like vines through hills and markets. Every morning, as the sun brushed gold across tiled rooftops, the air came alive with the calls of merchants, the ring of temple bells, and the mingling scents of tamarind, burning incense, and warm, sweet rice. Life here was orderly, rhythmic, a blend of mountain silence and city song. But lately, that rhythm had broken, not from plague, not from drought, but from something deeper, more primal. Fear, not fear of armies or kings, but of a creature, Nalagiri, a bull elephant so massive that earth seemed to lean under his step. Captured from the wild mountains of the north, Nalagiri had been kept in the royal stables since he was young. Once a proud spirit, free to roam cliffs and bathe in wild rivers, now he was shackled day after day, year after year. The weight of captivity grew inside him like fire trapped in stone. He grew restless, then bitter, then dangerous. Stable boys quit, guards were replaced, chains grew thicker. Nalagiri's cries echoed through the stone halls like thunder rolling through empty skies. The people of Rajagaha whispered that madness had taken him, but not all feared him. One man saw an opportunity in that rage. Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, a monk by appearance, but a storm beneath the robes, jealous of the Buddha's calm, his followers, his truth. Devadatta sought power, not peace. And when his teachings could not rival the Buddha's, he plotted instead. He went to King Ajatashatru, young and proud, his rule still soft around the edges, and he leaned close. "Let Nalagiri loose," he whispered. "Aim him at the Buddha. See what becomes of silent wisdom when tusks meet flesh." The king, tempted by spectacle or swayed by flattery, agreed. And so, one morning, before the city had fully woken, the iron gate to Nalagiri's pen creaked open. Chains were undone. Commands were given. The path was cleared. Nalagiri stepped forward, eyes wide, breath steaming, mind ablaze. He charged through market streets, through cloth stalls and fruit carts, scattering baskets and lives. People screamed, children ran, dogs howled and carts overturned. He did not walk. He tore the world open beneath him. And down that path, barefoot, cloaked in saffron robes, carrying only his arm's bowl, walked the Buddha. No guards, no weapons, no rush in his step, just presence. His disciples shouted from behind walls and corners, "Lord, turn back, the elephant comes, he will crush you." But the Buddha kept walking, not with recklessness, not with pride, but with compassion so still it could hold a mountain. As Nalagiri approached, the air thickened with heat and tension. His tusks gleamed, his trunk coiled like a whip. His roar shattered the morning hush. Mothers shielded their children, merchants fell to the ground. The entire city held its breath, but the Buddha stood. The elephant thundered toward him. The ground trembled, and then stillness. The Buddha raised his eyes and looked. He looked not at a beast, not at a weapon, but at a being in pain. He saw the chains, the years, the sorrow turned to rage. He saw the hunger for freedom twisted into madness. He saw a heart once wild, now broken by cruelty. And in his gaze, he held no fear, no judgment, only recognition. As Nalagiri neared, mere strides away from trampling the man before him, he met that gaze, and something changed. The wind quieted, the air cooled. The fire in Nalagiri's eyes flickered. He slowed, then paused. His ears twitched, his breathing hitched. He took one more step, then stopped. The Buddha stepped forward. Slowly, gently, one hand raised, not to strike, not to shield, but to bless. And Nalagiri knelt. He folded his legs beneath him, lowered his head like a branch under rain. A great groan, half sigh, half sorrow, escaped his chest. And there, in the middle of the street where rage had once ruled, the Buddha placed his hand on Nalagiri's brow. Not with domination, but with presence. And the elephant wept. Tears pooled beneath his eyes, streaking down the folds of his face, darkening the dust. His trunk coiled softly around the Buddha's arm, no longer as a weapon, but as a gesture of surrender. The city watched in stunned silence. The same elephant who shattered stone fences and snapped trees now sat like a disciple at the feet of peace. Devadatta, watching from the shadows of a colonnade, said nothing. His plot, like a snake uncoiled, had slithered away, not with defeat by force, but by a truth too gentle to resist. Later, when the sun rose fully and the city slowly exhaled, Nalagiri returned to the royal grounds, but no longer was he led by whip or chain. He walked slowly, willingly, like a monk returning from alms. The Buddha returned to his seat beneath a banyan tree, his bowl untouched, his robe still bright. And the people came. They came not to celebrate a miracle, but to understand a lesson. They asked, "How did you stop him?" And the Buddha replied, "Anger cannot be conquered by anger, but by love alone. Fear cannot be silenced by force, but by understanding. The wildness in others is often the cry of suffering, not wickedness." And so it was taught that true strength is not in the fist, not in the sword, but in the heart that stays open in the face of danger. The tale of Nalagiri passed from lips to scrolls, from scrolls to temples, from temples to time itself. Children would ask their mothers, "Is it true that the Buddha tamed the elephant?" And they would answer, "Yes, my child, but not with magic, with seeing. Seeing the pain in others, seeing the fear beneath fury, seeing the being behind the mask, and meeting it with love." Nalagiri lived out his days not as a beast of burden, but as a gentle giant, offering rides to children, watering temple gardens with his trunk, and standing calmly when the monks recited sutras beneath the trees. It is said that when he died, the earth grieved gently, and his spirit rose unchained. Some believe Nalagiri was reborn in a heavenly realm. Others say he was reborn among the disciples. But all agree on this, that in the still gaze of one awakened man, an ocean of rage was calmed. Not by war, but by peace itself. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever, and yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it." The prince stared at the man as he passed, the way he paused to catch his breath, the way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. A solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. "Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish." Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow. a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self. His earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. She was just the cleaning woman. That's what most called her. Not nun, not practitioner, not devotee, just the woman who swept the temple. She arrived before sunrise, her hair tied back in a grey knot, her robes plain and faded, her broom worn thin at the bristles. She did not chant, did not preach, did not study sutras in the main hall. She swept the stone walkways, the meditation hall. The steps no one noticed were dusty until they were clean. And when she swept, she smiled. Some of the younger monks whispered, "She's not really practicing. She doesn't even sit in the morning zazen. She just does chores." But she never responded. She bowed to them anyway. Years passed. One by one, the monks left for higher temples, deeper study, more advanced masters. But she remained, still sweeping, still silent, still smiling. One spring morning, the abbot called for an assembly. The monks gathered, some sitting in strict posture, others blinking away sleep. The abbot raised his voice gently. "I have been observing this temple for many years," he said. "And in all this time, only one among you has reached the heart of the Dharma." Heads turned. The scholars straightened their backs. The meditation leaders adjusted their robes. The younger monks held their breath. And then the abbot looked to her, the woman with the broom. She was in the corner, brushing dust from the edge of a wooden beam. She paused, looked up, and smiled. A silence fell over the room. Then whispers. But she never studied the Diamond Sutra. She never debates koans. She doesn't even recite the Heart Sutra. The abbot turned to them and said, "She lives it." This is the story of embodied wisdom, the kind that doesn't speak loudly, but moves like breath through a humble act. Commentary. There is a great misunderstanding in spiritual life, that awakening comes only through texts, or teachers, or temples. But the Buddha taught in forests. He sat beneath trees. He pointed to rivers and mountains and empty bowls. He said, "The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart." The woman who swept the temple did not need to talk about mindfulness. She was mindfulness. Every stroke of her broom was deliberate, every step a prayer, every breath a chant. She did not perform her devotion, she lived it. You can memorize every scripture and still miss the truth. You can quote the sutras and still live with bitterness. But you cannot sweep the floor with love for 30 years and not be changed. The Dharma is not performance. It is not approval. It is presence. Many monks seek truth like a prize. They strive. They compare. They seek recognition. But the woman who swept the temple had no audience, no ambition, only a broom, a path, and her attention. That is enough. That is more than enough. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." Because the truth doesn't take you away from the world. It brings you deeper into it. It makes you pay attention. To dust in corners, to the sound of your own breath, to how gently you place a bowl on the table. We live in a time of noise, of opinions, of spectacle, of credentials. But the Dharma whispers, sweep, breathe, smile, and mean it. That is enough. So wherever you are, whether folding laundry, washing dishes, answering emails, tying your child's shoes, do it with all of you. Do it like the woman who swept the temple, and let the dust be your teacher too. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. The monk sat alone in the temple courtyard. The wind moved gently through the pines, stirring fallen needles on the stone path. A bell rang in the distance, soft, fading, until the silence returned like a breath held still. It was here, beneath a slanted wooden roof and beside a moss-covered wall, that the question first came. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It was not a riddle, not meant to be solved like a puzzle. It was a koan, spoken not to explain truth, but to unseat the mind that demands explanation. The student who received it was young. His name is not remembered, not because he was unworthy, but because names cling to form, and this teaching pointed beyond. He bowed low to the old master who had given it to him. "Sensei," he said quietly, "I will meditate on it." The master nodded but said no more, and the student went out into the world, not to escape, but to listen more deeply. At first he tried to reason. He sat in the zendo, legs crossed, breath measured, mind tight. He clapped with one hand against the wall. He slapped his thigh. He waved his palm in the air. None of it answered the question. Frustration crept in. "This is foolish," he muttered. But the question remained, not like a stone blocking a path, but like a wind behind him that would not stop. What is the sound of one hand clapping? He spoke to other monks. One said, "It is silence." Another said, It is the absence of duality. A third just laughed and walked away. The student grew weary, but one morning, while sweeping the courtyard with a worn broom, he stopped. The breeze brushed against his robe. The crow called out from the roof beam, and something softened. He had been trying to answer the question, but the koan was not asking for words. It was asking him to see. Long ago, during the Tang dynasty in China, a great Zen master named Hakuin taught in a small mountain temple above the rice terraces. His students came from far and wide, some nobles, some peasants, all seekers. One day, a scholar arrived, well-dressed and full of knowledge. "I have read the sutras," he said, bowing. "I have studied philosophy. Now I wish to understand Zen." Hakuin nodded once and poured him tea. The cup filled, then overflowed. The scholar pulled back. "Master, the cup is full." "Yes," said Hakuin, "and so are you." The scholar blinked. "How can I show you Zen?" Hakuin asked, "if your mind is already spilling over with answers?" The scholar was silent. In Zen, emptiness is not a lack, it is readiness, not void, but space. And koans are not doors to be unlocked, but mirrors held up to the part of you that cannot be named. Back in the modern temple, the young monk was told by his master, "Take this koan with you." So he left the walls of the monastery and walked for days. He sat by rivers. He listened to windmills. He watched farmers plant rice. Hands sunk in the mud, like prayers returned to the earth. In the clatter of chopsticks. In the rustle of robes. In the space between footfalls and breath. He waited to hear it, the sound of one hand clapping. Years passed. Once, he returned to the master and said, "It must be silence." The master shook his head. Another time he said, "It is everything." The master only smiled. "Keep listening," he said. In a village by the sea, the monk took up work as a fisherman, not to abandon the path, but to live it. He cast his net into the morning fog, watched the sky blush with daybreak, and learned the rhythm of waves as if it were a chant. One evening, a boy approached him on the beach. "Are you a monk?" the boy asked. "I was," he said. "Do you still pray?" The monk nodded. "Yes, but not with words." The boy sat beside him. They watched the tide pull back the shells and kelp and memory. After a long while, the boy whispered, "What are you listening for?" The monk smiled. He held up his open hand. "Nothing," he said, "and everything." Back in the temple, the master grew old. He no longer walked the garden path alone. Students brought him water, prepared his meals, folded his robes. One day, he called for his disciple, the young monk who was no longer young. They sat together beneath the pine beams. "Do you hear it?" the master asked. The disciple nodded. There was no sound, and yet the crows, the wind, the silence itself, all echoed a truth beyond sound and silence. The master reached out and gently placed his palm against the disciple's chest. "Not here," he said, touching his head, "but here." And then he laughed, deep, full, warm as firelight. In Zen, the sound of one hand clapping is not meant to be heard with ears. It is the sound of the mind giving up its struggle, the sound of the ego ceasing to divide. It is not a trick. It is an invitation to let go of the need to name, to release the grip that separates this from that, self from other, sound from silence. Years later, the disciple became a teacher. A student asked him, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And the teacher did not answer with words. He picked up a broom and swept the courtyard. He poured tea for his student. He sat, he waited. And the student listened. Zen does not aim to explain. It invites you to experience, to sit still enough that the need to explain dissolves. The sound of one hand clapping is not something you hear. It is something you become when you drop the illusion that there are two hands to begin with. No answer can give you that. Only awareness, only presence, only the quiet bravery to not know. And in that not knowing, you just might begin to hear. The river was wide and still, glass-like beneath the pale morning sky. Mist hovered just above the surface, curling and drifting like breath from a sleeping world. A single heron stood motionless at the water's edge, waiting for the ripples to still. On the far bank, the Buddha walked slowly toward the shore. His robe was the color of earth after rain, simple, unstained. In his hand, he carried only his bowl. And in his eyes, there was a depth that made even the wind seem to pause. The monks had already gathered beneath the Bodhi trees. Some sat cross-legged on dry leaves. Others stood in quiet reflection, watching the river. Today's teaching would not be long, nor loud, but it would be remembered. The Buddha stepped to the edge of the river and sat upon a low stone. The current moved slowly behind him, and in that quiet, he told a story. There was once a man, he said, who lived by a river much like this one. Every morning he bathed at dawn. Every evening he listened to the wind hum through the reeds. And one day, as he meditated near the shore, he saw a small boat drifting toward him. A few monks turned their heads toward the water as if expecting to see it. The boat was empty, the Buddha continued. No oars, no sail, just a simple wooden vessel carried by the current. The man smiled. There was peace in its stillness. No demands, no conversation, no self to disturb the quiet. But weeks later, the Buddha said, as he sat again near the water, another boat appeared. It drifted toward him, slow, gentle, and quiet as before. He raised his hand slowly, but this time, there was a man in it. The listeners grew still, and as the boat drew closer, it veered slightly, striking the meditating man with a soft bump. The Buddha paused, and the man leapt up, furious. Some of the younger monks blinked. He shouted, the Buddha said. He scolded the other. He demanded to know why he had not steered, why he had disturbed his peace. There was a silence in the air now, a silence of recognition. But when the first boat struck him, when it was empty, he felt no anger. There was no one to blame, no insult to receive, no self to defend. He turned toward the water. Anger arises, he said, when we see another as the cause of our suffering, when we believe we have been wronged, when the self rises to declare, this should not have happened to me. The monks were very quiet now. But what if we saw all boats as empty? He asked. A breeze moved through the tall grasses. Somewhere, A bird called out once, then fell silent again. When another insults you, the Buddha said, they too are being carried by a current of pain, confusion, fear, conditioning. Just as the boat was moved by the river, they are moved by the winds of ignorance. He let the words settle. To shout at an empty boat, he said, is to shout at the river, to push the current with your hands, to exhaust yourself against what was never personal. A monk near the front, young, eager, lifted his gaze. His name was Tissa, and he had recently quarreled with another monk over the rules of chanting. Blessed One, he asked, but if someone harms us, deliberately, cruelly, is that not different than an empty boat? The Buddha nodded. Yes, intention matters, but even those who intend harm are caught in currents they do not fully see. He looked gently at Tissa. The man who lashes out is often protecting a wound. The woman who lies is often afraid. And when you react with anger, you are caught in your own boat, convinced it has a captain, steering by will. A senior monk, older with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, bowed slightly. I have learned, Lord, to hold my tongue, but the self still burns inside. I smile while feeling the fire of pride, of injury. The Buddha smiled gently. Then you have seen the fire. That is the first step. He reached down and picked up a small pebble. When a boat is struck, the water ripples, but it returns to stillness if we do not stir it further. He placed the stone down. Do not pretend there is no fire, but do not feed it. Watch it. Know its shape. See how it arises. And know this: it does not belong to you. The river flowed steadily behind them. A real boat now passed in the distance, its oars dipping quietly, evenly. You are not the boat, the Buddha said. You are not the current. You are not even the river. He looked to the horizon where the morning sun had begun to rise. You are the witness, the space through which all of it flows. A few monks closed their eyes. To let go of the self is not to disappear, he said. It is to stop clinging to what is not you, the story, the injury, the name Dot. He drew a shape in the sand beside him, an open circle. When you no longer need to be right, you listen differently. When you no longer need to be seen, you observe. When you let go of I and mine, peace is not something you chase, it is what remains. That night, as the wind cooled and the scent of lotus drifted on the breeze, the monk sat beside the river. Tissa approached the elder monk he had quarreled with, bowed deeply, and said nothing. No apology, no defense, just the stillness of an empty boat. The elder bowed in return, and in that silence, something greater was restored. In the years that followed, the teaching of the empty boat would spread like a soft echo, across rivers, over mountains, into cities and quiet huts. Not as doctrine, but as insight. That much of what we suffer is born from the illusion of a fixed self. That the insult, the injustice, the anger are often just ripples in a river that does not know your name. And when you learn to see each passing vessel as empty, not meaningless but free of blame, then you too can drift more lightly. Letting go, not to vanish, but to float. Still. aware, unmoved by the waves of the world, like the Buddha that morning by the river, watching everything and holding nothing. In the heart of the city of Vaishali, not far from the clamour of markets and the perfume of jasmine, there lived a man unlike any other. He was wealthy, yes. His robes dyed in saffron and silk, his estate wide as a lake. He was respected, known to governors and scholars alike. He was a householder, a father, a merchant. But more than that, he was awake. His name was Vimalakerti. Unlike the monks, he did not wear simple robes. Unlike the ascetics, he did not live in the forest. He lived in the world, but not of it. He walked through noise with the silent mind. He moved through illusion without being caught. And so his teachings were sharper than sermons, his presence more disruptive than thunder. One day, it was said that Vimalakerti had fallen ill, not from weakness, but from compassion. He had taken on the sickness of the world so others might awaken. Word reached the Buddha and his disciples, so the Buddha asked, "Who will go and visit the ailing Vimalakerti?" One by one, the great disciples declined. Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, Ananda. Each said, "Master, I cannot. I have debated Vimalakerti before, and I was humbled." Because this layman, this non-monk, non-official, had a clarity that even the great arhats could not match. His words undid your logic. His questions pierced through pride. He was kind, but unshakably sharp. At last the Buddha turned to Manushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Manushri, without hesitation, said, "I will go." So Manushri entered the city, accompanied by heavenly beings, monks and devas. He found Vimalakerti reclining on a simple bed beneath a flowering tree. His eyes were calm, his illness invisible, his presence unmistakable. Manushri bowed. "Venerable one," he said, "how should a bodhisattva view the world?" A simple question. And Vimalakerti answered not with poetry, but with paradox. A bodhisattva views the world as a magician views an illusion, as a dream, as a mirage, as a bubble on water. Manushri asked again, "What is the root of this illness?" Vimalakerti replied, "The root of my sickness is the sickness of all beings. When they are healed, I will be healed too." And then he began to teach, not with lectures, but with reversals. He said a bodhisattva must live in the world without being trapped by it, must speak without attachment to words, must enter duality in order to transcend it. His home became a Dharma hall, his bed a throne of emptiness. Then came the final deepest question. Manushri asked, "What is the ultimate teaching of non-duality?" One by one, the assembled bodhisattvas gave answers, each profound, each poetic. They spoke of emptiness, of no birth and no death, of neither here nor there, of neither self nor other. Each spoke in turn, until all had spoken. Then they turned to Vimalakerti and asked, "What is your answer?" Vimalakerti looked at them, smiled, and said, "Nothing." He remained completely silent. No gesture, no word, just presence. And in that moment, the hall fell still. Even the wind paused at the edge of the window. And the bodhisattvas understood. because that, his silence, was the answer. Beyond yes and no, beyond concepts, beyond even the word beyond. Only direct knowing, unspoken and complete. Commentary. The Vimalakerti Sutra is not just a scripture, it is a mirror, held up to the part of us that clings to roles, to robes, to rank, to rhetoric. It reminds us, wisdom is not a matter of appearance, and truth is not always spoken. Vimalakerti was not a monk, but he understood Dharma more deeply than most. He owned property, but was not owned by it. He lived among crowds, but dwelled in emptiness. He used language, but was not trapped by it. And when the time came to speak of non-duality, he let silence do the speaking. Sometimes, silence is escape. But sometimes, it is clarity, not a refusal, but a revelation. A silence so full, it says everything. There's a Zen saying, when the mouth is closed, the Dharma speaks most clearly. This is what Vimalakerti embodied, the wordless transmission, the truth beyond fingers pointing to moons. In our world, we often rush to speak, to fill the space, to define, to prove. But Vimalakerti teaches, when we stop grasping, when we stop arranging words like armor, what remains is presence. The silence was not empty, it was alive. It was not passive, it was the roar of no self. It dismantled even the idea of someone giving an answer, and left only this. You don't have to be a monk to wake up. You don't have to renounce your life. You have to see through it, and then live with depth, with clarity, with compassion, from within the illusion, while no longer fooled by it. Vimalakerti's room is still here. Every moment you stop trying to win the argument. Every time you stop needing to prove you're wise. Every time you rest in the space before thought. You are sitting beside him, and you are silent too. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The leaves whispered of him before his name ever reached a village gate. Parents clutched their children. Merchants rerouted their caravans. Monks bowed their heads, not in reverence, but in caution. For the man they called Angulimala roamed the forests like a curse in flesh. They said he wore a garland of severed fingers. They said he moved like wind through tall grass, too fast, too silent, too deadly. They said he had no soul, but the truth was more complicated. He had once been ahimsaka, a child born to a noble Brahmin family, gentle, studious, with a heart like spring water, clear, eager, pure. His name meant harmless, and for a time it fit. His parents glowed with pride. His teachers praised his mind. He recited texts with ease and never raised his voice. He walked the sacred path with reverence. But even gardens grow shadows, and in the heart of his teacher, a master once kind, jealousy stirred like embers beneath calm. What if this boy outshines me? What if he is remembered while I am forgotten? And so, the poison was planted. Whispers behind closed doors. Lies dropped like oil into water. The teacher turned the other students against ahimsaka. Then, turning to the boy himself, he spoke. If you truly wish to complete your training, bring me a gift. 1,000 lives, 1,000 fingers. Ahimsaka was horrified, but loyalty ran deep, and confusion deeper still. His world, once steady, spun sideways. The teachings twisted, the compass lost. And so he walked into the forest, heart trembling, mind clouded. At first, he resisted. Then, he rationalized. Then, he obeyed. One by one, lives fell. One by one, fingers were taken. He strung them on a garland around his neck, not out of pride, but as proof. A grotesque tally, a vow he could not break. Ahimsaka was gone. Only Angulimala remained. Years passed. Villages emptied at the sound of his approach. No warrior could stop him. No plea could reach him. He lived in the trees like a demon, fed by fear, haunted by silence. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by the river and weep, not loudly, not dramatically, just a single, soundless shudder, as if his soul still remembered what it used to be. Then came the day everything changed. A new rumor reached the region. A monk in saffron robes was walking the land, barefoot and alone, unarmed, unafraid. His presence turned swords to dust. His gaze stilled storms. The Buddha. Angulimala laughed when he heard it. "Let him come," he said. "Let me take his finger too." And so he waited. It was mid-morning when the figure appeared, walking slowly along the forest path, robe brushing the grass, eyes lowered, bowl in hand. No fear, no hesitation. Angulimala stepped out from the trees, blade drawn. But the monk did not stop, nor did he hurry, just walked. Calm, present, silent. Something in Angulimala snapped. With a roar he charged. The earth pounded beneath him. His breath came wild. His blade glinted in the sun. But no matter how fast he ran, the monk remained just ahead, neither speeding up nor slowing down, until suddenly he stopped and turned. Their eyes met. The forest held its breath. Angulimala's chest heaved. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop walking!" And the Buddha spoke, calm, clear, eternal. "I have already stopped, Angulimala. It is you who has not." The words hit harder than any weapon. Stopped? The monk had stopped? Angulimala blinked. "What do you mean?" "I have stopped chasing harm, stopped feeding the fires of anger, greed, and ignorance. But you still run." Angulimala lowered his sword. "Not all the way, just a little, but enough." What should I do?" And the Buddha stepped closer, unshaken, unarmed, unafraid. "Drop the weapon," he said, "and follow." For a long moment, Angulimala stood frozen. The forest was silent. Even the wind waited. Then, with trembling hands, the man removed the garland from his neck. Each finger clattered to the ground, like a lifetime falling apart. He dropped the sword and fell to his knees. "I don't know how to walk your path," he whispered. The Buddha extended a hand, not to lift, but to witness. "You already have," he said. The townspeople were outraged. When word spread that Angulimala, the killer, the terror, the demon of the forest, had become a monk, they rioted. They threw stones at him as he walked. They spat at his feet. They demanded his blood. But he did not strike back. He carried his bowl. He bowed when struck. He sat in silence and wept again, but not for himself. For them, one day after a particularly violent outburst from the crowd, he returned to the monastery bruised and bleeding. The Buddha looked at him, eyes deep as sky. "You endure much, Angulimala." Angulimala bowed his head. "I deserve it." "The past is a shadow," the Buddha said. "It follows you until you stop turning to chase it." One morning, he heard a woman crying in labor outside the village. The pain was great, the danger greater, but the people refused to help. "She's cursed," they whispered. "Her child will be born into blood." Angulimala stepped forward. "I will go." The villagers gasped. "You, the murderer, you'll curse her." But he walked past their fear and knelt beside the woman. His voice was soft. "By the truth I now live, by the harm I have abandoned. May you and your child be safe." And she was. The birth was clean, the child strong. From that day, the whispers began to change. Years later, the man once known as Angulimala became a teacher of peace. He lived quietly. He sat often. He spoke gently. Children no longer feared him. Old men bowed to him. Mothers called upon him for blessings. But he never forgot the garland, never forgot the sword. They were not trophies. They were reminders of how far a man can fall and how far a soul can rise. When his final day came, it was quiet. The monks gathered near. He sat upright, as always, in meditation. He did not cry, did not call out. He simply exhaled, one long, peaceful breath, and let go. And in that final stillness, the forest that once whispered his name in fear, now whispered something else, forgiveness. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, "I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings." 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, "Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice?" And in his mind, a voice replied, "Whatever brings benefit, I do it." The monk frowned. "But how do I know what will help?" The voice was soft. "When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service." This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it, even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, "do it completely." In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough, where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish, it is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down, and vow again. Because the path is long, but every step walked in service becomes joy. The forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. A group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with a story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then," he raised his hand, "an arrow strikes him." The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow. He paused, but then the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. That is the second arrow. Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. "The first arrow," the Buddha said, "is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages, illness comes, people leave us, we are wounded by life, by loss, by chance." He drew a line in the dirt with his finger. "But the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves." He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. "So the suffering comes not only from what happens," he said, "but from how the mind meets it." The Buddha smiled. "Exactly." A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. "But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain?" The Buddha's gaze was kind. "He may cry out," he said, "but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison." He looked at Rahula. "You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain." The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, "I will never be whole again," or "I should have done more," that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. "Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it." An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. "I have carried many arrows in my life," he said softly, "not in the flesh, but in memory." The Buddha nodded. "The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot." He looked toward the trees. "But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes." A silence followed. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve or ache or tremble. He gestured to his own chest. This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow. He placed his hand upon the ground. But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, this is me, this is mine, this is forever. He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, "Even the fire burns only what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally, like a wound that knows how to heal. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the oxherding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, He sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast, a silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called, and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone, dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox, only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another, no duality, only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too, in the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary. The oxherding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you, waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. The midday sun beat down on the monastery grounds, turning the stone paths warm beneath bare feet. A hush lingered under the mango trees, broken only by the soft sweep of a broom or the distant cry of a minor bird. Somewhere in the distance, a pot clinked gently on a wash stone. It was the kind of afternoon that invited stillness. Under the spreading shade of a sala tree, the Buddha sat. His robes were folded neatly, his spine straight yet effortless. His gaze lowered, not in sleep or withdrawal, but in alert peace, like the surface of a quiet pond. From the southern walkway came Malunka, a young monk with a troubled brow. He had once been praised for his intellect, admired for the sharpness of his reasoning. But in recent months, that sharpness had turned inward. Each meditation left him with more questions than silence. He dreamed of stars, of time looping backward, of endless rebirths and impossible beginnings. He had filled scrolls with inquiries. He debated with scholars until his throat ached. But peace never came. And so today, he came to the Buddha. He bowed low. "Blessed One," he said, "I have questions." The Buddha did not speak immediately, but his silence was not dismissive. It was a space, an invitation. Malunka hesitated, then stepped forward. "Is the universe eternal?" he asked. "Is it infinite? Will a Buddha exist after death or vanish like smoke? Is the soul bound or free? Is the world self-created or born of design?" Each question emerged like a stone cast into a well, sharp, fast, echoing. The Buddha remained quiet. Malunka's face tightened. "Why will you not answer me?" he asked. "Are these not worthy questions? Are we not seekers of truth?" The Buddha looked up. His gaze was soft but steady. The other monks nearby paused in their work and drew closer, sensing the moment. The Buddha spoke. "Let me tell you a story. There was once a man," he said, "who was struck by a poisoned arrow in battle. The wound was deep. The poison spread quickly. His friends and family rushed to bring a healer. But the man, gasping, objected. "Before I allow treatment," he said, "I must know who shot me. Was he a nobleman or a labourer? What was his clan? Where was he born? What kind of bow did he use? Long or short? What wood was it carved from? What was the arrow's length? The feathers? Were they peacock or eagle? What poison did he use, and who taught him?" The monks chuckled, some hiding smiles behind folded hands. But the Buddha's gaze didn't waver. While the man demanded these answers, he died. He turned fully toward Malunka. "Would you call that man wise?" Malunka lowered his head, chastened. "No, Blessed One." The Buddha continued, his voice like slow water. "We are each struck by the arrow of suffering, pain, aging, death. The urgent question is not what lies beyond the river, but how to stop the bleeding, how to live with clarity now. We must remove the arrow before the poison spreads too far." Malunka stood in stillness. The breeze lifted the hem of his robe. His hands, once clenched, softened at his sides. But don't those other questions matter? He asked. Aren't they part of the path? They may, the Buddha said, but only after the wound is tended. Theories are branches, but we must first tend to the root. The Dharma is not meant to entertain the mind, it is meant to free it. The young monk exhaled. For years he had studied commentaries, argued with visiting teachers, sought certainty in logic and definition. But now he saw the arrow was still in him, and each speculative thought, each metaphysical obsession, had only twisted it deeper. That night, Malunka did not return to the library. He sat by the monastery's stone well and watched the moon ripple in the water. He did not write. He did not speak. He simply breathed, slowly, honestly. For the first time, he noticed the weight in his chest, not as a puzzle, but as pain. In the morning, he returned to the Buddha. He bowed deeply, forehead touching earth. "Blessed One," he said, "I no longer ask if the universe is eternal. I ask how to meet this moment without fear." The Buddha smiled. That is the first step. And from that moment forward, Malunka's practice changed. He spoke less, listened more. When new monks asked abstract questions, he did not dismiss them. He simply asked, "Is this question healing you or delaying your healing?" Word of the exchange traveled. Soon, the story of the poisoned arrow spread, not as a rebuke of knowledge, but as a reminder of urgency. In a village struck by drought, a farmer mourned his ruined fields. His hands trembled with anger. "Why has fate cursed me?" he asked his neighbors. "Why was I born here and not in richer soil? Who sinned in a past life to bring this?" But then he remembered the story of the arrow. He sat beneath his withered tree and whispered, "How can I help my family now?" And the answer came quietly, "Begin digging a well." In a riverside town, a mother wept for her daughter, taken by fever. She begged the heavens for a sign, wondered what sins she had committed, questioned every past decision. But the village priest, who had once trained as a monk, told her the story. That night, she held her daughter's shawl and lit a lamp in silence, not to understand fate, but to honor love. Elsewhere, a scholar stood before a crowd, reciting theories about the soul's origin and whether consciousness survives death. In the back row, a quiet boy raised his hand. "Sir," he asked, "have you removed your arrow yet?" The crowd fell still. The scholar did not answer. He returned to his room that night and sat without books for the first time in years. The Buddha never forbade questions. He welcomed inquiry. But he offered a compass, not a cage. He simply asked, "Will this question free you? Or bind you? Will it heal your wound? Or distract you from the blade still buried?" That became the measure. And so the monks learned not just what to ask, but when to ask and why, because the arrow is real. The pain is now. The wound is not a theory, and the first task, before philosophy, before argument, before metaphysics, is to pull it out, not later, not after you name the wood, not once you've traced its lineage, but now. In one hand, he carries a book, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom. In the other, he wields a sword, long, luminous, and aflame with clarity. He rides a lion, not to show power, but to symbolize the fearlessness of insight. This is Manushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, where Avalokiteshvara brings compassion, where Samantabhadra brings vow and action. Manushri brings the sharp, radiant truth. His name means gentle glory, but his wisdom is not soft. It does not comfort. It cuts. It slices through illusion with the precision of a blade honed on silence. The sword he carries is not for battle. It is for discernment. It separates appearance from reality, self from no self, thought from knowing. It reveals what we are too afraid to see and too free not to see. In the old sutras, it is said that Manjushri's wisdom is so sharp, he was enlightened before the Buddhas of the past. He is the eternal teenager of the Mahayana pantheon, ever young, ever clear, ever unburdened by delusion. Where others hesitate, Manjushri speaks. Where others follow rules, Manjushri asks why. Where others cling to views, Manjushri lets go, again and again and again. One day a monk asked him, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" And Manjushri drew his sword in the air, then lowered it slowly, as if slicing through something invisible. That was his answer. Because words can't always hold wisdom. Sometimes it must be shown. In Zen temples, the figure of Manjushri is often placed behind the Roshi's seat, not as decoration, but as a reminder that true teaching must be rooted in clarity, that every word spoken should come from a place that has already cut through ego, opinion, attachment. The teacher, like Manjushri, must see clearly before they speak. There is a famous koan. A young monk full of doctrine said to the master, "I've memorized the Heart Sutra. I understand emptiness. There is no I, no ear, no mind, no path, no attainment." The master pointed to a bowl of rice and said, "Then eat, because understanding is not the point. Living is." This is what Manjushri teaches, wisdom that is not locked in scriptures, but embodied, applied, lived. The sword is not aggressive, it is necessary to wake us, to free us, to carve away the clinging and the confusion until only truth remains. Not an idea, but a mirror with no dust. There's a story told in the mountains. A disciple sat meditating, trying to silence his thoughts. He came to Manjushri in prayer and asked, "Please cut away my illusions." That night, in a dream, Manjushri appeared. He said nothing, only lifted his sword and placed it gently on the disciple's shoulder, not to strike, but to remind him, the blade is not outside you. It is within. Commentary. Manjushri does not give you answers. He gives you the means to see for yourself. That is his wisdom, not dogma, but discernment. Not belief, but perception stripped of filter. The sword cuts two ways. It cuts through ignorance, but also through comfort. It forces us to ask, what have I built my life on? And what happens when that is no longer solid? Can I let go? Can I breathe? Even when the ground beneath me vanishes. Wisdom is not knowing more. It is needing less. It is silence that doesn't need applause. It is clarity that does not waver in the dark. It is the ability to sit in confusion and not flinch, to stand before illusion and not bow, to name what is and let go of what is not. The lion Manushri rides is not a beast of war. It is the mind that has been tamed. The roar is no longer fear. It is the roar of reality unfiltered. The courage to face things as they are. There's a quiet danger in spiritual life. We want wisdom to feel good, to validate us, to comfort the parts of us that ache. But Manushri reminds us, true wisdom will sometimes hurt. It will dismantle the story we've told ourselves. It will whisper, "You are not who you think you are." And if we listen, the story ends and life begins. In your own practice, the sword appears in many forms. The question you can't answer. The moment you realize you've been wrong. The teacher who looks you in the eye and says nothing because anything they say would only get in the way. That is the sword, cutting gently, so you can see clearly. You don't have to fear it. You have to wield it. In kindness, in honesty, in the decision to no longer live half asleep. When you chant, chant with the sword. When you bow, bow with the sword. When you love, love with the sword. Not to harm, but to see clearly what love is. Because love without wisdom is sentiment, and wisdom without love is cold. But together, they are Manushri and Avalokiteshvara, and the path itself. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.